morning, everybody. How you guys doing today? Good. It's Friday, and I don't know about you, but I'm happy it is. It's been a long week. I'm Jane Elliott, president of NERI Atlanta. Thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate it. And it's a great turnout. We've got a great topic on social media today, and I'm going to introduce our panel here in a second. Before I do that, I want to make a few announcements. One, we have a golf tournament April 30th. It's Friday at Cobblestone, and we hope that you please sign up to register. We have a lot of great sponsors. It's going to be a great day with breakfast and end with a lunch. So please go on our website, neriatlanta.org, to register. And if you have questions, you could call Jeff Dodge, who's here in the back over there, or Bob Burton, who's not here today, but I'm sure we all know Bob. So please go ahead and register. It's going to be a great time. The second announcement I have is we will be sending you several emails over the course of the next few weeks, more so than usual, that you're going to see from NERI. We have been conducting a membership survey. You might have gotten that the last couple of, probably last few weeks. We're going to send out one more reminder probably on Monday, and the goal of that membership survey is really just to get ideas for, if you're happy with the programs and the topics that we've been covering. So I really highly appreciate if you guys could participate on that and send us your comments. So look for that on Monday. Now also next week we're going to be sending out an email with our cast of board members for our next year NERI 2010 to 11 board year. We've got a lot of board members this year that will fall off due to our term limits and or some job changes that occur. So I would encourage you to look for that email, and we'll list who we're suggesting and what roles they will play. And we would like to have a 3-week open period voting for that, and then we'll announce the new board members in our May program, which is on May 21st here in this room. And our May program, as long as we're talking about it, is trading strategies. And basically it's going to be a panel designed to, when your CEO walks into your office or your CFO and says, what's going on with the stock? We hope to offer some insight on how to answer that question. So please look for that information as well. And what else am I supposed to announce here? We, as you're aware, have been collaborating with the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals, the Southeast Chapter, and they are holding a dinner at Atlanta's Botanical Gardens on May 6th. And there's going to be a panel discussion and keynote speaker from the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta on May 7th. So they're holding a dinner, a breakfast, speaking event, and then a lunch. So we sent out an announcement, I think yesterday or the day before, with that information. Plus you could go to their website too if you're interested and want to register. So with that, finally, I'm going to introduce today's panel. With us today we have Norman Black, Director of Global Media Services for UPS. And Norman has an extensive background from 20 years in journalism, ranging from his work with the Associated Press in Washington, D.C., covering a variety of areas of the D.C. government, Congress, telecommunications, and the computer industry, in addition to his 5-year role as Chief Pentagon Correspondent before moving to media relations. After moving back to Atlanta in 1993, he headed up the newly formed PR shop for Sprint's Business Services Group, and later switched roles to become Director of Corporate Public Relations at Equifax in '95. And he is currently with UPS since 2007, and he's responsible for global media relations, crisis and reactive response, financial communications, and social media policy. We also have Chris Fetty with us, Vice President of IR Sales across North America with Precision IR. Prior to him serving in Precision IR, Chris served in the investment banking division of Commerce Bancorp. And Chris is responsible for Precision IR's mutual fund program, conference webcast division, and development of virtual roadshow product for their global media partnership network. Delia Moore, many of you know, one of our own members here, is currently manager of investor relations at Aflac and is responsible for overseeing the retail investing activities at Aflac, and including educating both the individual, the broker, and the financial advisory investment community. And Delia is actually going to be serving as our moderator today. This is an interactive program. She's going to open the program up, and then we hope to get a lot of questions on our social media topic today. And finally, our fourth panelist is Eric Warner from Thompson, Reuters. Eric serves as North American Commercial Manager of the Investor Relations Services offered within their corporate services business. And in this role, Eric is responsible for commercial strategy, policy, strategic alliances, partnerships, and operational execution related to services and solutions targeted to investor relations professionals in North America. Eric's held a variety of management positions focused on delivering sales results, forging strategic alliances, and implemented training and integrated acquired companies. So with that, I want a round of applause. It's a great panel. Thank you for being here. And welcome to Delia. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jane. Good morning, everyone. Well, you know, when we were preparing for this this event, it was interesting because one of the things that we realized was everybody has maybe a different definition for social media. So what we wanted to do this morning, as Jane mentioned, we want this to be very interactive because, you know, this is something that's so new that really I think as we continue on through this process, everyone will start to kind of define what it is. So the first thing that I wanted to do this morning is to kind of ask everybody in the audience, just maybe by show of hands, how many people currently use social media as you would define it in your IR program, or maybe considering it? And that's pretty much what we expected, because that's about what our response was too. So with that, what we wanted to do is kind of go across the panel and define what each one of us think that social media is. I was actually surprised to find that really there are different definitions based on, you know, maybe your perspective. So I'm going to start it off with my definition, and then each of the panel members are going to kind of go through what they believe it is. And then, you know, please do feel free to jump in if you've got some questions as we're discussing and as this conversation flows. So to me, social media, and maybe a lot of you agree with me, from an IR perspective, social media to me is, you know, the various new networks that have kind of popped up where people are able to come together mainly for networking purposes or social purposes to have discussions about, you know, a variety of different things. So for example, you know, of course, Twitter, I certainly do believe is something that I would consider as a social media outlet. Facebook, MySpace, and then maybe more professional social media, I would include LinkedIn, which I'm a member of that. So the LinkedIn also I would include in social media. But to me, those are the kind of things that are social media. And I'll stop there and then let the other guys kind of go through their definition of what they believe social media is.
Good morning, everyone. So I had to give some thought, I guess, to defining social media. And I guess when I started, I looked at it and said, well, it's typically on a personal or a social level is how I looked at social media. And it was more around creating a connection, being able to monitor what all my other connections were up to, provide updates as to what I was doing, and then prompt an action of some sort, whether it was a get-together or communication with somebody who was out of touch. And that's kind of the context that I always looked at social media. And it wasn't until about maybe 6-8 months ago that we started to look at it from a business perspective around similar context. It's an opportunity, as I see it, to create connection, whether it's within your industry, outside of your industry, outside with your competitors. It gives you an opportunity to provide update as to what you're doing, as much as you can share, not get yourself in trouble. And then an opportunity to monitor and update what's happening in the market broadly. And I found it as a tremendous tool at this point, given my role and function, having to monitor competitors, having to pay attention to who's doing what. And there is a wealth of information that you found out there. And most of the time, people that put it out there don't even realize that they're putting it out. So I look at it from a business sense now as a much more of a monitoring tool and understanding. I don't do as much updating to keep the cards close to the vest, but it's a tremendous tool to help now drive action in terms of what we take decision on, et cetera. So the involvement of that has been quite a bit, from more social to really taking that business context around update, monitor, and then drive action of some sort.
Thank you. I have to say I agree with all my panelists. We look at it as a new web-based tools that make it easier for individuals to connect. And that's a completely different dynamic than what we normally do, particularly in the corporate world, of using tools where we're trying to reach out all at once to a particular audience, or a large audience, much larger audience. Social media is, I think it does include all the different things that you mentioned, Dealer. But it's, fundamentally, it is individuals connecting with each other, and you have to understand it in that context. That can be a powerful force that you have to worry about. Forrester and some of their research has said that they think we're going to get to a step here where more than 70% of the online content on the web is going to be generated by individuals talking to each other. There's also a prediction that the social media is going to become the driving force in terms of how you make buying decisions. The most important thing to you is what your friends think of this restaurant, that washing machine, that whatever. And that the social media that we're seeing today empower that. At UPS, and I'm sure we'll get into this as the panel goes on, we've made a very conscious decision so far not to use social media for investor relations activity. But we have become very active explorers in that space for a lot of other reasons that have to do, or that started, I should say, with protecting our reputation. And as you were mentioning, kind of wanting to know what's the, what's that conversation out there saying about my company. But fundamentally, it's just individuals connecting with each other in a different way.
Well, I think most everybody's already covered sort of my thoughts, but my initial thoughts when we were preparing for this meeting about social media was my wife sitting on the corner of the sofa talking to people she hasn't talked to in years, and that's kind of, my initial thought was it's really more of an extension of what you do in your everyday life as neighbors and coworkers and so forth, and reconnecting with other folks that you haven't seen in a long time. But that was my generalized definition. But from a business perspective, I think what it's allowed is for more people to spread their ideas to a much broader audience versus sitting around the water cooler or what have you, talking about a particular stock or a particular product. It's now you're talking to the entire world about those particular items. So essentially, it's almost made everyone an individual expert in their own world that they can publish out to the whole world. So I think, as you put it, it's a very impressive thing, but it's also a very dangerous thing, and one that you have to use very cautiously and be very, very careful at how you leverage it. But I think the more important piece of it that we've touched on a couple of times is it does allow you to get a better feel for what people are saying. I mean, it's a great monitoring tool because now those side conversations are now all over the web that you can search for. And I think that that's probably the first step that most investor relations officers will probably be using social media in the aspect of what are people saying about my stock, or I just released earnings, what's the attitude in the marketplace as well as Main Street as what they thought of the earnings release. So I think that's the biggest and most powerful aspect of it. But I also think, like any other technology, is going to continue to evolve, and we all, both on the vendor side and for your side, have to continually monitor how that evolves and what that brings to our everyday life.
Okay, that's great, and I think it's interesting how a lot of us have the same thoughts about that. One of the things that I wanted to do next is, Norman had touched on a little bit how UPS utilizes social media, so I kind of want to go through with that discussion, maybe kick that discussion off a little, and maybe, you know, I'll talk about what Aflac does, and then maybe if anybody from the audience wants to offer what their company is doing, that would be great. Aflac, our position on social media, as I defined it earlier, from an IR perspective, we currently, similar to Norman, we have not decided to use social media from an IR perspective. We're just not comfortable with, you know, well, let me rephrase that. By the way I defined it earlier, we are not using it. Now, what we are using social media for, on our consumer side, we definitely do have some things that we're using, and we think from a consumer side that it works very well. And, you know, the Doug is so popular, and so we definitely are using that. He has a Facebook page. He's got a lot of hits too, a lot of friends on Facebook. We've got a lot of Twitter activity going on as well. And so from that standpoint, I think, you know, it really does fit in with what Aflac is all about. You know, we're known for our marketing strategies. We're known for how we market, you know, the company, the Duck. And so we really find social media to be something that we can really kind of definitely get a lot of mileage out of. But from an IR perspective, you know, all of us in this room certainly know the concerns around that from an IR perspective, financial information. But one of the things that we do that I really didn't think about when we started this conversation is we do use, you know, like the Yahoo Finance chat room or board, message board. We do monitor that from time to time, and I venture to say that a lot of you here probably do. We have found that to be beneficial, more from a standpoint of just kind of knowing what the thoughts are. And one of the things that we do as far as monitoring the boards, especially when there's you know, maybe an issue that comes up that we really have no clue of how, you know, people might really be feeling about it, we'll go out there and say, okay, well, let's just see, you know, because you have to kind of take all of that with a grain of salt too, because a lot of times you may have people who have a specific agenda as to, you know, why they're putting some of the things out there. Like sometimes we might have former agents who are just upset and angry, and, you know, they're just kind of throwing it out there. But sometimes you can get some good insight and maybe some information that you can use to be beneficial. So we do use you know, that, which I guess you could say that falls under the social media umbrella. We also do some advertising, online advertising with Yahoo Finance and with some of the other online tools, which I never really typically thought about that as being social media. However, what I guess you could say is that maybe that advertising, maybe some of the same audience would be accessing that information. and we're in the earlier stages of that, going through maybe our second year of kind of seeing where that takes us. But I will say one of the things that I've been impressed by with that, doing online advertising through those types of channels versus your typical print, is that you do get a lot more information and able to gauge a little bit better on the ROI as far as, okay, how effective is this? Are we, reaching the goals that we're trying to reach? It's not where I would like to see it, but it definitely is a lot better than print. So that's kind of AFLAC's current position on social media, and I don't know, any of the other panel members want to maybe talk about where their companies are or what they've seen.
Sure. Thank you, David. So at Thomson Reuters, there's a variety of ways that we've looked at social media to I guess put a tag on it, but essentially more around utilizing the web, both to gather information, disseminate information, and then product integration. So a lot of what we've done, I mean, as many of you I'm sure know, we're the largest global news organization in the world at this point. And our news organization, particularly in the business community, a significant percentage, more than half, of a lot of their news stories are generated by monitoring things like Twitter, expert networks, blogs in a variety of different ways. So the news industry is heavily plugged into what's happening on a lot of those expert networks, blogs, Twitter, etc. We also push a lot of content out there to make people aware that news stories are coming, etc. So our news organization is heavy, by far the heaviest area of usage within our company. From a business perspective, I mentioned earlier we do a lot of competitive research with it. From our executive suite, our CEO has a blog that he's been running for 5+ years at this point, so he was, I guess, ahead of the curve in a lot of ways in terms of leveraging a direct communication out into the marketplace. And on the product side, we've heavily embraced it in terms of the trends. Did anybody see the announcement yesterday that Google made ahead of their earnings? No? So Google announced yesterday that they were, for their earnings releases, they're no longer going to, they're essentially going to embrace notice and access, which will allow them to put their releases up for earnings directly to their website without putting out a large press release associated with that. So that was kind of a quiet ruling from the SEC some time ago that hasn't been heavily embraced by the IR community. We have a handful of clients that do that. But the ability to now do that, where you don't have to use traditional channels to get your message out, are ways that we're trying to invest. So there's a tremendous amount of efficiency that gets driven with that. You have the ability to create your own content, publish it, not rely on others to do it, which is essentially the crux of social media. I think, as Norman had said, in time 70% of what's going to be out there will be created by individuals. So giving companies the ability to author. And then, the biggest conundrum there is, where does it go once it's gone out there? Trying to track who picked this stuff up and what did they do with it, and did it have an impact, is the other area that we are focusing on in terms of providing real analytics about who read this, what the sentiment was that was driven from it, and has there been market impact, either to the stock or in the news area. So Thomson Reuters is heavily involved with both use of the product. In the IR world, we are adopting similar things to what Google is doing, not quite as fast as they have, but similar stances there as well. And I think, as Delia had said, we're not there in terms of proactively pushing content out there, which is the case for just about everybody in IR at this point. But this is not a fad, clearly. There is lots to be leveraged to make your lives easier, as well as to give you deeper information about the impact.
You want to keep the same order, or you want to?
Might as well.
Well, just like AFLAC, UPS got started on this road, this particular journey, about 2 years ago by putting in place monitoring systems. We weren't doing anything. We were just trying to make sure we had a way of watching and understanding what was going on out there. And from the beginning, we did set up the monitoring so that every day when our people are doing that, we're certainly looking for any financial conversations, whether it's on Yahoo or whether it's people tweeting or blogging or whatever. That's always been part of the monitoring. It's only been within the last year, though, that we went active and stepped into creation of a corporate blog, putting people in place who are actually tweeting during the day, putting up RSS feeds, exploring different ways of talking to people. It has, in our case, it proved critical that we understand it from a service complaint standpoint, to be perfectly blunt, and to know when people were talking to each other about poor service that they were getting from UPS, and why they didn't understand why they hadn't gotten their package, or they didn't understand why their claim for a damaged package hadn't been paid. This past week, as a matter of fact, we had a very dramatic example of why you have to be in this space, at least when you're talking to consumers, and that was with the launch and delivery of the new iPad device from Apple. We were the primary carrier for delivering those iPads this past Saturday, and that's just such an amazingly techie connected community, Apple users, that they were spreading all kinds of misinformation out there among themselves about when their iPad was going to arrive. We can be kind of amazed at it, but it was, it was like, well, the tracking shows it left Shenzhen, China on Monday, and it's in Louisville, Kentucky today, so I'm going to get it early. I'm going to get mine on Thursday, and I don't have to wait because it's already in Louisville. Well, no, that's not going to happen. Apple made it very clear that everything had to be delivered on the same day. And regardless of when it got to Louisville, Kentucky, you're going to have to wait. But we see that kind of conversation as something that sometimes you have to jump in and participate in just to keep people calm. Now, in my job, I wear a couple other hats. I think you made an interesting point on the media side. There's no question that the conventional media is monitoring social media. There's no question they're using it as a tip service. But right now, anyway, we do not see the social media as supplanting the news, the conventional news. And this is another thing I think that you need to keep in mind from an IR perspective. I'm not going to remember the precise figure here, but the vast majority of news that is circulated on social media is, whether you're retweeting or blogging or whatever, is passing on something that you found from a conventional news organization. Whether it was something that you found on Reuters or something that you saw from the AP on the New York Times website, or something you saw on the website of your local hometown newspaper that you thought was interesting. That's what people right now are resending to everybody. So you have some pretty well publicized situations where the first picture of the plane landing on the Hudson River came from somebody who was tweeting and had a camera phone with them. But it's most of the time they're resending news that they're still getting from the conventional side. But those regular news organizations are spending a lot of time monitoring just to find ways to or to be first to break news as it happens.
Basically, for us, we use it three different ways, I would say. From a corporate standpoint, we have a Facebook page, we have Twitter, just from the standpoint of communicating with not only clients but prospective clients about our services. The second point is like Eric, we use it from a competitive intelligence, market intelligence, educational. Not only what are IROs saying that potentially could drum up a new product for us, but what are competitors doing, what new products there might be out there. And then a third aspect of how we're helping our clients, which is, it's just a small piece of social media, but through all of our webcasting that we do for our clients, we have a number of outsources through RSS feeds where we're able to disseminate a podcast style of the webcast out through a number of different channels. And when we first launched that probably about 3 years ago, I would say the average attendance for a podcast versus a webcast was probably about a 10-to-1 ratio, meaning 10 on the webcast, 1 on the podcast. Whereas now we actually have seen a ratio flip where you'll almost see twice as many people on a podcast than they are on your actual webcast. So more and more we've been able to expand our distribution, but also more and more investors are using the typical RSS feeds to get a lot of webcasts and additional online medias. And I think back to Eric's point, the biggest thing that we're doing for our clients, and I think a lot of the other vendors in the space are, is helping them with communicating over the internet. The internet's been here for 20 plus years, and we're still trying to figure out how best to use that to communicate. Social media is just one other aspect of that, but how can we get more people going to websites, viewing videos? How can we get them listening to our webcasts? And that's really what we're doing from a perspective of quasi social media, internet marketing, and so forth.
Okay. Well, does anyone in the audience have maybe any comments or questions that they want to ask before we? Because we're kind of, again, we want to get your input and make this as interactive as possible. Any questions about anything, or maybe comments?
I just, we work for Southern Company, and we did look into this, getting into this particular audience of investor relations, and we asked the people who work in the organization to see if any of their clients were actually using Twitter and all some of these social medias, and basically the feedback was not yet. So we have also kind of, it's a lower audience, or the audience has a lower ranking on how we're getting into social media. But I'd be interested if you're finding that the IR, the institutional investors and some of the audience is participating.
And maybe Chris or Eric, if you can comment on, maybe, because since you guys have a lot, customers in your world, maybe if you can comment on what you've seen from maybe different size customers, or what your experience has been.
From our perspective, we do see a varied degree of usage in social media. Our client base it ranges so broad, and actually two of our clients are right here, but we've seen sort of the larger cap, mega cap, and even part of the mid cap space leveraging social media more from a PR marketing perspective, similar to having a Facebook page for the duck. And also maybe the CEO just having a quick blog, more so what the company's doing, not necessarily what financially they're doing.
Right.
Now, there's also a segment of larger companies such as Google, eBay, that are tech heavy, tech followed, that will, during the course of their earnings calls, tweet the message. As it's being delivered via webcast, they'll send out top, high level tweets. Yeah. The challenge there is you have to have all the disclaimer tweets before you have anything else. So that's kind of an annoyance. But those companies are starting to use it. What I do find, and I was in Vancouver earlier this week with a number of our junior mining companies and small cap companies. They're heavily using social media from the standpoint of updating on mining results, recent finds. They put a lot of their mining corporate video up on YouTube, and they use it, again, it's a marketing perspective, but they rely very heavily on a retail segment to drive their overall stock and interest. So they use social media very effectively and heavily. But there's just a disparity at this moment. It depends on what audience you're trying to reach. We talked to one of our pre-calls. some of the best audiences are Yahoo Finances, so using the message boards there, monitoring the message boards there are definitely the high-level areas to focus on. But I think there's definitely a disparity amongst size of company and industry. Those that require a lot of continual updates, those people that might be doing 10 press releases a month are also doing a lot of information outreach via the social media space.
So I'll touch on, I guess, 3 distinct areas, and the last one will be kind of what I see in our client base. But I think the first 2 are, to this audience, probably very important in terms of how people are using it, the buy and sell side. And we've done a fair amount of surveys across our business, which touches all parts of that community, really. And the use is, in adoption in those worlds, is starting to get very significant. So in the buy side, they monitor, they spend a lot of time looking at particularly expert networks. They monitor employees. They look at employee web pages that are put at those companies to get a sense of what are they saying about what the inner workings are that are happening in the company. So they're not to the point yet where they're making investment decisions driven off of any of that, thank goodness, but they are certainly monitoring and paying attention. The sell side, we're starting to see rapid adoption. We actually saw it similar to what we saw in the news organizations. They are using it as ways to find tips to get a sense of what the trading dynamic may look like. So they are trading on information that they see in places like Twitter, employee Facebooks. There was a company that a sell-side analyst had talked to us about. It was a drug company, and they were heavily betting on the results of a particular drug. They got 90% of the information that they made decisions to trade on based on what their employees were tweeting and putting up on their profile pages about how well those drugs were selling. So there's a variety of areas that they're digging into. So, importance of policy, as Norman had said, having a policy to police what your employees can put out there, that competitive intelligence that can be found in what the buy and the sell side are starting to dig into is there for them to find and make decisions on. Our clients, our usage, it varies quite widely at this point. And I honestly think we're on a cusp of some very big things happening. There's tools that are becoming available that make authoring and publishing much easier. There's tools that are coming available that allow you to monitor more holistically what the sentiment and what the impact of your disclosures are. So we have a lot of companies that I would say have toes in the water. They're doing both. They're using traditional media to push things out, and they're experimenting by tweeting and putting things on Facebook and otherwise. But I think we're on a cusp of an area where a lot of the traditional channels to push content out is going to shift, and there'll be the ability to take advantage of those in a much more tangible form. But I also think it varies heavily based on size of company. We see a lot of small companies that are looking to get attention, that don't have the brand recognition, that heavily utilize the social media channels to get their brand out, to get their name out, to get that recognition both amongst investors and, again, as the public as a whole. Many of the large, big brand name companies, they don't have to do it as much because they have the recognition. But if you have a duck, the duck will draw. So there's a big blend there as well.
I just want to re-emphasize what you brought up there about policies. Regardless of whether or not you're ready to proactively use some of these channels yourself, you better be thinking about putting policies in place that tell your employees how they should talk about the company even when they're on their private channel. It's not easy to fashion that policy. It's not easy to teach people, educate your workforce about it, or the importance of watching what you're saying. But it is important, and that's actually ought to be right up there with, it's probably step number 2 after you start monitoring, is to actually start engaging with the right people inside your company to develop that kind of policy. Coming back to your direct point, precisely because our emphasis is the institutional investor, and we're not seeing the institutional investor relying on these channels right now, that's a big reason why we don't try to aim at them.
And there's risk.
Yeah.
A lot of risk.
Yes, Becky.
I actually have a question. Before you, have you been doing any research into the security aspect of keeping the information that's being released, the integrity of it? Because, I mean, with Twitter and Facebook, the level of people making false pages or setting up dummy accounts to get information out would be more detrimental, and actually you would be spending more time putting out those fires than actually getting quality information and actual information out about the company. And has Twitter or Facebook been approached to see how they can strengthen the security of their applications also to benefit you? It's like a marketing.
Sorry, I know from a security standpoint, both Facebook and Twitter, I don't know if everybody's read the news, but they've been hacked a number of times. Even the president's account got hacked. So I know that there's a lot of uneasiness from companies setting up IR-related pages because of the fact that someone could, prior to, or right when our earnings calls going on, start releasing inappropriate false information. I know that both Twitter and Facebook have invested heavily in their security. That's not to say that it's not 100% fail-safe, but there's still definitely a lot of concerns out there with hackers more and more targeting those areas. I mean, anytime you have something that really picks up steam, the hackers are going to go after that area. So I think it's still a lot of caution as to what you do in that regard. So to your point, I think there's still definitely security issues there.
Could I mention, add to that? I know that Twitter has verified accounts for celebrities, but they are working on creating verified accounts for businesses, but they don't have that yet.
Yeah, and I think it was a big week for Twitter. At least every time I picked up the newspaper, they seemed to be at the top of it. I mean, one, that all of a sudden everything on Twitter is going to the National Archive is going to become part of history, so that's pretty big. They also announced that their plans of how they're going to make money, which near and dear to everybody in this room's heart is how we actually make money. But part of that was big security announcements around getting clients to identify themselves, verify who they are, and then obviously there's going to be a significant change in Twitter, as there will be folks there that are paying for that premium space in some ways, like the Google one. So I don't think they're, to Chris's point, it's an involvement. The internet is still open and free, and people can create things on their own, which is the importance of staying monitoring and knowing what's out there. But I think we're still getting there.
You're all professionals. I'd like your honest opinion. Do you think that Twitter is a credible source for information?
Go ahead the line if you want. Go ahead.
I mean, I think it is to an extent. I mean, it's 140 characters. You can't tell a lot of a story there, but if it's a trusted source, I find it credible in that it gives me something to go on if it's something that I hadn't heard about. I mean, part of how I heard about Google yesterday was because of Twitter. There was an announcement that came through. It said it was there, and it pointed me in another spot to go get research. I think in isolation, it's not very credible. But if you use it as a source to prompt you to go do more research, to dig in more, I think from a notice perspective, it's very credible.
And I'm going to agree with Eric. I think if all you relied on was Twitter, certainly no. I don't think that would be credible, and I don't think it would be a smart decision. But I do think that it does, maybe give you insight as to maybe where else to go, or maybe give you a thought about something that you never thought about it in that way, and maybe prompt you to take some other sort of action.
Agreed. It's not credible. It's personal opinion. But do you care what your friend is saying? Do you trust everything that your best friend has ever told you?
And the only thing that I would add is that from a credibility standpoint, I think it still relies on the person that's doing the tweeting or twitting or whatever its actual name it is. But I mean, for some people who have newsletters that are renowned and do use Twitter, that's some credible information. But it still goes back to the source right now, but I agree with the whole panel here. It is a great addition to your normal research and educational aspects. I wouldn't take it as gospel, but I would definitely take it as an additional source.
I work for a pharmaceutical company, and we're developing here in our website, social media, because we're developing a new product in its men's sexual health. And it's a very misunderstood condition. There's a lot of misinformation, and we know that there's going to be a lot of social media, going through. And we felt it was going to be important for us to have a source of information so that we would have reliable, accurate information instead of a lot of information, because it's different than, say, hypertension, where there's not much more you can tell anybody about hypertension than they don't know about. The other thing that we found was that meeting with reporters, that they may not write a story in the journal, but they have their own blog, so they would write stories on their blog. So one, it makes me be a little more, I think, proactive in doing the due diligence, whether it's ourselves or a PR firm, and before we talk to a reporter, to look at not only what's in their printed publications, but what they've been saying in their blogs. So we have an idea of what their bias is, or where they're reporting. I have a question for UPS. I was driving over today. I heard that they had still canceled flights in Europe. And I was thinking, when you have a volcanic eruption where you canceled the flights now, and they're saying maybe for a week, so you're talking almost 4 days. How could you use this tool, because now there's going to be a lot of information and misinformation when you're using the same airports that, passengers use. And so is there a way that you could use these vehicles to try to communicate information?
Oh, absolutely, but let the record show, we have our own secret airports around the world, so we don't. No, the closure of European the closure of European airspace right now absolutely affects anybody with a jet airplane. We were all right until very early this morning in Europe when Germany closed most of its airspace. Our main hub for Europe is in Cologne, Germany, so that shut down our main hub there. So as long as European airspace is closed, we will not be able to fly anything in or out from the U.S. or Asia into Europe. So it's a huge problem. But yes, there is an example of where we're using not only the conventional media in Europe, but also social media to tell people, remind people that UPS is affected by this, just like their passenger airline is, and they gotta go to the web or their mobile app or whatever and track, where their package is or what the delay is, because there's no way around it right now as long as the European airspace is closed. But that's a great example of, every time we put out a press release, whether it's earnings or anything else, we tweet that, and we blog it, and we talk about it, all of our releases, whether it's earnings or not. But something like this, where you've got a service disruption, there's a good case of where you can absolutely deploy social media as a proactive thing. So you're right. I mean, that's a good use of it. Now, I do have to really agree with one other observation that you made there. Right now, it seems to depend on what sector you're in, what vertical you're in, as to whether or not the blogging community or webzines are playing a big role in molding public opinion compared to the conventional media. Just to give you one example, our media relations effort at UPS in the environmental space corporate sustainability and environmental issues. We are now as focused on certain reporter, bloggers, and webzines as we are on conventional media, and that's a change. I mean, that's a big shift for us. It's recognized that in some verticals, it's more important that I talk to, you know, Mark Gunther, ex-Fortune blogger, about corporate sustainability than it is that I talk to even the reporter at the Wall Street Journal, because of the audience that particular person has. But you can't say that right now about very many verticals. There's only a few, quite frankly, where we're seeing that much influence right now on the internet as opposed to the conventional media. But that was a very good point you made. And we do have secret airports.
I have a question in regards to if you have an investor day meeting. You had mentioned putting out, I guess, a notification or a disclaimer prior to any tweets. If you were going to blanket an IR day meeting with 140 characters, how do you go about putting a disclaimer before your tweets?
Well, I actually read it for what the gentleman at eBay had to go through, because I guess the story goes he had a blog and he was, you know, talking about things, and the lawyers kind of slapped him on the hand. And so it is, when I was reading through it, there was probably 8 different tweets based on disclaimers before you even got to the content. So it was like, tweet 1, go here, tweet 2, go here, and it was a very cumbersome process to go through. So I don't know exactly how you're going to get around that, other than maybe having links, you know, within the tweets that go here for the disclaimer. But there was still a layer of, it was like 6 or 7 different tweets as it related to the disclaimer before it even got into, okay, now the CEO is talking about XYZ. And so that was one of the things where, you know, I guess the cautionary aspect of anyone is make sure before you do anything, you go talk to your lawyers and make sure everything's covered. But he didn't do that. He didn't get in trouble for anything. But once the lawyers did get involved, it was like this process, this process, this process that they had to go through.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, and I think we agree on this front, your corporate website is probably the best place to put as much of that as possible. So just the mere direction or the announcement that there's something there that somebody should go see. You know, you can obviously do a lot more there, and you can also, to a certain extent, have an understanding of who's coming in and picking it up as well. So, you know, leveraging it for notification purposes more than anything else, and then putting it into a place where you can control what the content is. I mean, some companies, I don't know if you saw about Toyota and how they handled the recall. They got slammed about how they tried to use social media and not very effectively to get that message out, because they on their Facebook page they had a link back to their corporate website, so they had virtually no information, just a link. So I think it depends on, if you're using Twitter, you're limited in what you can do. In other sites, you have the ability to expand a bit more, again, as long as it's within the realm of what your legal team will allow you to do.
Question.
I was wondering if I could expand on the question there about tweeting and what eBay went through. I mean, I think there's a difference between having like Joe from engineering blogging about his take on a company's earnings versus having like a branded channel where you discuss something like that. And so the idea of conference calls are public, right? Anyone can dial into the call. So I think there's a difference too between using the financials that are a part of the news or just picking up like the key phrases that your PR team shares stuff about, right? So when there's a line that the CEO is using to talk about the quarter or whatnot, those are the types of things that the reporter might use to quote. Lifting that type of content out of an earnings call or the script from an earnings call and sharing that via Twitter is something kind of Home Depot, that's something that we've been doing for several quarters now. And legal's been cool with that. There hasn't been, knock on wood, any ramifications from that. We don't tweet the financial part of it. We might tweet the headline or something from the release, but more the commentary that the execs are making word for word and reiterating that is something we've been able to
No, well, I find that very interesting. Again, in our case, we just haven't decided that there's enough of an audience there that's reading only through Twitter to take that step. I understand the division in what you're tweeting that you're talking about. Have you found? I mean, are people follow you or
interact? It's funny because obviously our base is mostly consumers, right? But there's a lot of people with a stake in the company who follow our Twitter as well. And so they'll interact, right? So I mean, a big push that has allowed us some room in social media is the whole company's change and focus on customer service. So anytime we talk about that, here's the investments we've made, here are the changes we've made, and that's what they talk about in our calls. So it's a natural extension of what we're already talking about on Twitter. It's just a reiteration from, well, here's what our CFO just said, or here, so it just puts more context around it for people. But I do see some of our investors on there, but probably not the institutional side. It's more individuals and whatnot that are really our consumers. But there seems to be more and more of that going on. But no, it's an interesting. People respond. People will retweet. People will weigh in and say, "Oh, it's worked at my store. I've still held up before." So we're just talking about things we're going to talk about on Twitter. But I was mentioning to Mark earlier. Last quarter, our CFO actually referenced social media and that impact that we've seen in social media with our customer service line. And so it's funny, so when we tweeted that aspect of it, hey, guess what our CFO just said? People loved it because you have all these social media experts on Twitter that are watching, and so, oh wow, here's the CFO of a big company that reiterates the value of being here and being accessible and just communicating with our customers in a new way. And it was just interesting to share that feedback from our CFO and how people responded to that. And then we had some of our customers that we had helped on Twitter saying, oh yeah, it works for me, you guys are great, or so it's people who are passionate about your company or the industry that you're in, and so you'd be amazed at what they are interested in or what they will talk about.
Well, a couple things just to share with everyone on that. First of all, of course, we have a certain native bias, but English is the language of business around the world. And one thing that we've started charting and are monitoring at this point is the extent to which any of our social media aspects or our corporate blog or anything else are jumping the oceans and going into other markets around the world. And we're tracking how many followers, for example, are reading a particular item that are in Europe, that are in Asia, that are in Latin America, and it's a growing thing. So we try to keep that in the back of our head too, that it's not just the U.S. that we're talking about here. But then to your point about the CFO, we did just have an example with our CFO where now he was attracting attention with Twitter and all the rest of the social media because we put him at a conference in the past week where it was an environmental conference. They're talking about corporate sustainability goals and objectives and things you're trying to do in that space. And among all the speakers at this conference, including all the ones from corporate America, he was the only CFO. And everybody, all the sustainability experts and everybody, they were fascinated that here was a CFO who actually attached such a priority to finding ways of operating in a more sustainable manner. And so that got a lot of chatter started among that community. Now that was not a financial conference and he wasn't sharing financial information, but he was willing to put himself out in that and then to let us talk about it and his appearance there. So, I mean, you just have to be careful, I think, where it works for your company.
Can I just make a tack onto that? Just to add on, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is we look at our news organization and the impact of financial markets. So when you take news that has the ability to move the market in a variety of ways, the gulf between how long it would take that information to get out into the market and have an impact to somebody's stock has compressed exponentially. We're starting to track it in a variety of different ways, looking at our own news sources, and then the impact of expert networks and blogs and things that are happening on Twitter. And I think what's amazing is how quickly the market now reacts, not just to material disclosures like earnings, et cetera, but things that happen that can have impact to a company, whether it's a change in a CEO, a crisis, a Toyota, Wendy's from years ago. Wendy's years ago, social media played a big part in how quickly the market reacted to their crisis. This is the finger in the French fry, et cetera. But the distance then versus something similar today, the market's going to react, and that news is going to spread virally so much faster than it ever would through TV, traditional media, et cetera. So it's knowing how quickly these things are going to happen now. Another reason to pay close attention.
All right, I'm sorry, I wasn't going to talk to you, but I have to. No, that's a great point, right? So this idea of, especially for IR, right? Why the heck would anyone be on Twitter or open yourself up to that? But man, to have a presence in those channels when something like that does break, and to be able to hop on there quick and just squash a rumor or set the facts straight is so incredibly powerful. And without that base of influential people like you referenced before who are already included in a part of the conversation, you're just tweeting in the dark, like no one's going to see it. And we see that with I've got a bazillion examples, but it's just this concept of to already have a presence and have a following, and have that following include people who are influential in different channels. That all of a sudden, wait, we just heard, yes, we have a great example with Haiti, with the free delivery that was being passed around in social networks, where they were saying that you guys were going to deliver free to Haiti, and you guys don't even deliver to Haiti. But, so there's different things that were happening there where you guys were able to hop on and say, no, that's incorrect.
Absolutely, and that's the damage control part. Now we do deliver to Haiti, but we did not, and we jumped into the Haitian earthquake relief as fast and hard as we could, but we were not offering free shipping to anybody who wanted to send something to Haiti, and we had to use social media to jump on that.
And
right.
This happened between a news cycle, right? So the idea of saying, well, wait, let's call the news and it'll air at 11. Well, 11 is too late, and how do you get that news out now?
Right. Good point.
Just one more, I guess, news you can use type piece of information. A colleague of mine sat on a panel in Europe, very similar to this one, and one of the clients that were there, I thought gave some great interesting advice. That social media, to a certain extent, is a phenomenon of a generation that might pre or post-date many of us. So they actually went out and they hired somebody internally who was significantly younger, not to take this as anybody age biased in the room, but the way that social media is utilized by college kids, by younger folks in the workforce, is very different than the way many of us see it in a traditional sense. So they actually went out and found the person that was most active in their company, whether they should have been or not, brought them into their IR team, and had them be part of their IR team so they understood what the implications were of some of the things that they were talking about online, and then they got a great understanding of how do they use these tools and interact with them. And, bringing somebody in, it's kind of, company. If you're in the security business, you're going to go hire hackers. If you want to get a good sense of how this stuff is really being used, leverage some of the folks you have in your company that are heavy users to help get an understanding of what they're doing.
But by the way, don't assume, to your point, don't assume though that the Gen Y is an adopter of all this stuff, because there's great gradations within even that generation. I've got a daughter in college. She uses Facebook, religiously every day. She thinks tweeting is ridiculous. So I mean, it's a lot of this it's just brand new, folks. You just gotta watch it.
Well, I think we need to wrap up. So I just want to thank the panel again. So thanks everybody for joining, and see you next